topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson Show. She is an author, and she wrote, "Thou Shalt Not Whine," the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I'm January Jones, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast. As you can see, I'm on with my new brand. I'm the Glitter Granny. And some people can call me just the Hat Lady. Today, I'm wearing my brown feminist hat because this was Women's History Month this month. So now for my listeners, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had to negotiate something important, such as a business deal or a personal relationship? Do you have your own style of negotiating? Have you ever wondered what you could do to be more effective when you're negotiating anything? Can you imagine what it would be like to be able to go from the bedroom to the boardroom with success? Do you wish you could meet someone who can tell you how to do it, what it's like? Tell me, have you ever heard about an incredible book entitled The Art of Feminine Negotiation? I was thinking about that title before I came on the air, and I thought, what an incredible wedding gift that would be to give to any bride who is going on a honeymoon or starting out her married life. If you can answer yes or maybe to any of these questions that I've asked you, then you are in the right place. And I'd like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So now it's time, rest, relax, go get some wine, get some cheese and crackers, and you can join me in the no wine zone. Now let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. As a coach, my guest empowers women to unleash their feminine power and become the best version of themselves. She inspires her clients to dig deep, to rediscover their true purpose and take charge of their lives and make change in their lives. Her book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation, How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom, is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show today, Cindy Watson. Hello, Cindy. How are you doing?
Hey there, January. It's so great to be here, and I love your brown feminist hat. It looks fantastic.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. It was cute before we came on the air for our listeners. We were talking, Juan, our engineer, and Cindy, our guest. She's in Canada with 32 degrees. And Juan, who will never whine again on our show, is in Palm Beach, Florida with 82 degrees. So there you go. Those are the extremes weather-wise. Now, Cindy, before we start, let me just ask you, how did the pandemic affect your career? How did it affect your personal life? Any thoughts you could share with us?
Yeah, I think for everybody, the pandemic was such a profound shift. And I think it's one of those times when 100 years from now, we're going to look back and recognize more so even than we realize now, what a historic shift this was in terms of our economic models, the impact on, I think, our younger kids. Certainly a lot of the businesses that we dealt with, as a social justice attorney, the issue of mandatory vaccines was raising its ugly head all over the place.
Mhm.
But in particular, for women on purpose, I think the thing I found the most interesting was that for the first time in a long time, I'd say in my lifetime,
Mhm.
feminine skills or traits were being recognized as their value went up, their feminine stock went up, because they were looking at countries around the world and saying, oh, female leaders, countries with female leaders were doing better, which may or may not be true, frankly. But I love the fact that the value of feminine stock as a leadership skill went up. But
Yeah.
yeah, trying times.
Yeah, I think that's a very encouraging thing to hear for women everywhere. And you personally, did you work from home before, or did you start working from home? How did that affect your work?
Yeah, I had been doing some work from home already, so that was less of an impact. But a lot of, surprisingly, even in the legal profession, well, all of my speaking gigs obviously closed up for most of it. Although, ironically, I did my TEDx talk in the November of that 2020, which was kind of at the height of the pandemic. So that was an interesting experience. But for
Mhm.
the most part, most of the speaking on stage dried up. All of the legal services were being done remotely. Like we were having virtual hearings, which was unheard of. So it was a pretty profound shift from a workplace perspective, no doubt.
I know your TEDx speech was incredible. You did it in Ocala,
Yes,
and,
go, you do your homework.
and that's where my baby brother lives. So I'll give a shout
Oh.
out to him and everyone else in Ocala, Florida. So now tell us what came about? What made you think that it was necessary to address the topic of feminine negotiation?
Yeah, great. It was kind of a long time coming because I'd been a social justice attorney for many, many years. And as you know, our legal system is very competitive.
Mhm.
And I confess, when I started the practice of law, I looked around, I'm like a young 20 something year old, fresh face, naive kind of. And I'm like, oh, I'm all male, like especially in my niche market. I represented trade unions a lot early in my career. So I was almost always the only woman in the room. I thought I better get scrappier if I'm going to succeed. And I think a lot of women, whether in the legal profession, in the corporate world, believe that that's the case. And I dove in, and my clients called me the Barracuda. I'm now embarrassed to say they meant it as a compliment, but there's a
Yes.
really high cost that comes with that, right? And I started recognizing that it was affecting my professional relationships and then my personal relationships and spilling over to my sense of self. So ultimately, January, it's like, when women either shy away from self-advocating or negotiating because they don't want to be seen as the capital B, or we bring, as I did, that overcompensating energy. And I thought,
Yes.
you know what? If you look at negotiation, ironically, most of the skills that make a great negotiator are feminine traits. So we've got this backwards and upside down. And that was the epiphany for me. And I haven't looked back since.
Okay, that's a real breakthrough. I love hearing this, especially in Women's History Month. Now,
Yes.
when you're talking about some of the things, I'm sure that the advice you're giving can also benefit our men listeners too, can't it?
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. Because when you talked about the title, The Art of Feminine Negotiation, I really
Mhm.
agonized over whether to use that word feminine. And I knew I was going to get pushback. And
Uh-huh.
particularly in a society where we're moving away from sort of gender attributes, which I welcome. But I thought, no, you know what? Women in particular have really sort of suffered from stepping back or overcompensating. We all have masculine and feminine energy. So the art of feminine negotiation is actually not gender-based. And my hope is eventually that both men and women will start to tap into these feminine skills instead of seeing them as a liability, which I think for too long we have. And I believe it's one of the reasons the world's kind of shifted out of balance. So absolutely, both men and women, I invite them to lean into those feminine traits, see them as your secret weapons.
Okay. And I have to tell you, quite frankly, I think your subtitle is brilliant.
Thank you.
Boardroom to the bedroom. That got my attention. I'm sure it's going to get everyone's attention, whether it's men or women, whoever is listening. They're going to love that. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, just let's start off with what are a few of the traits that women have that will help them negotiating.
You bet. And actually, I can share a simple mnemonic with your readers. It makes it really easy to remember. The 6 key traits that make the best negotiators are, I call it the R-FIT model. So just think you are fit to be a great negotiator. So AREFIT. The A is for assertiveness, which is the one of the 6 that most people see as masculine. Although I actually think, January, to be honest, that's because they confuse assertive with aggressive, and they're not the same thing. But there's assertiveness, but 5 of the 6 of the rest of them, almost everybody polled will consistently classify them as being feminine traits. So it's rapport building, that ability to be able to build rapport when you come into a relationship. Empathy, bringing empathy to the table, seeking to understand the needs of the other side, putting yourself in their shoes. F is for flexibility. Women multitask a lot. So it's that ability to be able to shift when you're in a negotiation or a difficult discussion and shift gears, shift tone of voice. I is for intuition. They call it women's intuition for a reason, right? Being able to tap into your intuition and be watching for those reactions you're getting and being able to shift gears. And the T for trust, being able to build trust. You know, most people trust women intuitively more than men. A lot of studies confirm that. Whether it's justified or not, definitely that's a trait that people would see as feminine. So that ability to show up and listen and seek to understand is a game changer in getting better outcomes.
Okay, and I've written those down, and I hope that our listeners are writing these down too. You are fit.
Assertiveness, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust. So AREFIT, that's your little cheat sheet.
Okay, I've got it written down, and that will help us get through this podcast. In the meantime, we're going to take a break and hear about my book, Thou Shalt Not Whine. And as my engineer, Wine knows, Yuan, no whining allowed here.
Lately, there's a whining epidemic in our world. People are even whining about whining. Are you sick and tired of listening to everyone whining all the time? So was January Jones, the author of Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. Ms. Jones based her book on a survey of the top 10 things that people whine about at all ages and all stages of life. January is a success coach that can tell you how to help others. When you buy Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment, you'll find out what people whine about and how to stop them from whining. This is the perfect gift book to give or get for any occasion. Thou Shalt Not Whine was voted the best gift to be given anonymously for those special people in your life. Ms. Jones is an internationally known author in the style of Irma Bombeck, specializing in housewife humor with her book being published in Korea and China. You can find Thou Shalt Not Whine at Amazon.com.
Welcome back with my guest, Cindy Watson, who is definitely not a whiner because she is a winner. And I would like, Cindy, for you to share with our listeners how they can contact and your information, which is also running below on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And January, I love your idea about giving your book as a gift anonymously. That was priceless and pitch perfect. So that really resonated with me. Yeah, certainly your listeners can check out information on my website at www.artoffemininenegotiation.com. I invite you to check out the book, which actually its official launch is today in honor of International Women's Day. The ebook came out much earlier, but the actual physical book, I'm excited. I finally got it in my hot little hands a couple of days ago. So that was very exciting. So definitely check out the website. We've got blog posts and podcast, and you can book a breakthrough session if you want to learn more about up-leveling your negotiation skills.
Terrific. And, as I love showing my book covers on the show. And I also think my idea about giving your book to newlyweds.
I loved it. I loved it. That's going to be my new marketing campaign. It's brilliant.
Going to these wedding showers. This would be a great gift. Okay. So now, what are some of the myths that are out there that plague women when they're negotiating?
Yeah, I think that one is that it's a man's world out there is one of the problems, I think, that women have bought into for so long. I mean, how many times I've been guilty of saying it? I'm sure you have as well, many, many times, right? But also, I think this idea that negotiation is all about the toughness, right? That the person speaking the loudest and the longest is the person who's winning the negotiation. And even the concept, frankly, that negotiation is about winning and losing. I've heard really skilled mediators or really experienced mediators say, if both people walk away from a mediation unhappy, then I know I've done my job. And it drives me crazy. It is such a pet peeve. I am like, no, in an ideal negotiation, both parties walk away feeling better than when they started, not worse. So when we get away from seeing it as a win-lose, it's a game changer, but also this idea that emotion has no place in negotiations. That is a myth. We are humans. We are emotional creatures. We respond and we're reactive. And when we pretend that we're not going to acknowledge it, it's going to seep up in unhealthy ways. So recognize, don't be emotional in a negotiation, but absolutely bring the emotion of your deep why to the table to get those more creative outcomes. So, and obviously another myth, the fact that women aren't effective negotiators, simply not true. Women negotiate in a myriad of ways every day, but they don't think of many of those as negotiations. So those are the top myths.
I think women are born negotiating.
Absolutely. And when you think, January, of necessity, I mean, historically, we couldn't hold property. We couldn't have credit in our own name. We didn't have the right to vote. It was critical for us to develop rapport building skills and empathy and to be able to negotiate for our very survival for many years.
Yeah, so many of the young women that are listening to our show these days, they have no idea how it used to be. The other night, my husband and I, we went and saw an incredible play, Silent Sky, and it was about Henriette Leavitt, and this was in the 1900s, and she was an astronomer. And because of her, we have the Hubble telescope. But at that time, these women were actually not allowed to touch the telescope. She was working at Harvard with other women, and they were in their lab, and they were doing all this incredible groundwork, scientific groundwork, but not allowed to touch the telescope, which I thought was unbelievable. We talked earlier about empathy, and I think when you go into a negotiation, that would be a really strong point for a woman, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It makes a difference. And as I say, my hope is, I love that you asked the question about, does this apply for men, or does that make them weaker? Because imagine a world where everybody should, whether it's in your personal relationships, your professional relationships, or even if you think, January, on the global scene. I mean, a lot of the major world conflict we're seeing now, if people actually dropped in to truly seek to understand what was driving the other party and how they could meet those needs, it would be a game changer in terms of moving forward towards global peace. Not to be too dramatic about it, but absolutely, it is such a difference when you can truly show in. I was going to say even, but I would say especially when you disagree, it's even more important. I call it the art of fascination. Get curious, ask questions, try and come from that perspective, and you'll be able to come up with more creative outcomes.
And when you think about it, we've had so many incredibly successful women starting off with Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, all through the world, not in this country yet, but I'm looking forward to that someday, having a woman leader in our country. And when these women go to the negotiating table, of course, they have to be as tough as any man, but they bring so much more when they have empathy and when they're positive. I think that positive can-do approach works wonders.
Yeah. And look at Jacinda Ardern, like from New Zealand. I mean, during her tenure as the prime minister, the way she handled the childcare issue in terms of her maternity, and the fact, when would you have, like a decade ago, you would not have had a global leader say that kindness is their national language. It was this gorgeous shift to bring that feminine energy and recognize it as a strength instead of a weakness. I loved it.
Yeah. You've got a very good topic right now, and it's a very hot topic. And I think a lot of women are coming to the table. And what are some of the other myths about women that are not true?
Yeah, well, and it's funny because when you were saying about this being a popular idea about women coming up to it, you think not long ago, and I mean, I love her and I love her work, so this is with the greatest of respect, but even if you think Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, so much of what we have been conditioned to believe is, lean in by being equally sort of assertive, getting in there and bulldozing your way in. So I think a couple of myths that have been really problematic for women. One is that if you want to be successful, you need to elbow your way in there and talk over other people and be able to make sure your voice gets heard in that way, which I think can be really problematic for women. Or at the other end of the spectrum, modify your language, soften your language, rather than, I think it's been a very long time coming that women are being given permission. And I hope with my book, one of the things I want to do, lean into your feminine power, whatever that means for you. There's no one way to be a woman or a man or any of the spaces in between, but you don't need to change your tone of voice or adopt softer language to be accepted. Just adopt some really simple models and skills that will allow you to absolutely hold your own, but in a way that's not coming from that competitive place, in a way that is going to inspire people on the other side of the table to step up as the best version of themselves as well. That's a much better place from which to get power and to come up with those better negotiated solutions.
Yeah, and no one likes a pushy anyone, no matter what sex they are. But, so many times in my experience, women who have been a little tougher, they get criticized, like they get criticized so severely for doing things that most men just take for granted. And I think that has been a real problem with people being overly critical because they're not used to dealing with women. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because I think we often try and blame. I think the problem when we talk about unconscious gender bias as well is it becomes a blame game and then you get this pushback reflex. But I think we need to recognize it's not just men being biased against women. It's women against other women and even women against ourselves. And I would take what you're saying even a step further, because not only do women get judged more harshly if they show up in an assertive place, which you're absolutely right is true, but the thing that shocked me was even just based on perception. Like they did a study of a boardroom table and they took 2 photos of the boardroom table, and in one, same people at the table, but in one, a woman sitting at the head of the table and the other one, a man. And then they asked participants to describe the person at the head of the table. And incredibly, based on a photo, both the male and female participants described the man in really complimentary terms: strong, charismatic, a leader. And the woman was described as bossy and controlling. From a photo, January, right? As if the audacity to even sit at the head of the table caused judgment. It was incredible.
Oh, wow. And I see that is something that so many of us in my age group have had to deal with as we've gone through life. Right now, it's 60 years later since the Kennedy assassination. And now, would you like to hear a little bit about my theory?
Let me ask you a question. Are you still wondering who killed Kennedy? Over 50 years later, the assassination is still a mystery. It is unfinished business for our country. Now, get ready for a theory that you've never heard before, but will make more sense than any other conspiracy theory that you've ever heard in the past. January Jones speaks the unspeakable in her book, Jackie, Ari, and Jack, The Tragic Love Triangle, connecting Jackie and Aristotle Onassis romantically prior to JFK's assassination. Did you know that Ari was Jackie's guest in the White House during the JFK funeral? He was the only non-family member who was invited by Jackie to stay there during the funeral. Aristotle Onassis was one of the wealthiest men in the world, with the means, the motive, and the money to order an assassination that was the perfect crime of the last century. Ari needed class, and Jackie needed cash. They were perfect for each other. Now, what is Camelot? It is but another tragic love triangle. Jackie, Ari, and Jack is available at JanuaryJones.com, Amazon.com, and audiobooks.com, read by Ms. Jones.
Also, Oh No, Jackie O is just come out in audiobook, and it is being read, or was read, by the Story Genie, and she did an incredible job with it. Now let's talk a little bit about negotiations in a woman's personal life. Let's make this a little personal, if you could do that, and also share some of your personal negotiating stories, please.
Okay, you bet. And by the way, totally piqued my interest with your Jackie book there. I'm going to have to check that out. So, yeah, and allow me to get very real and vulnerable with your audience here, January, because I really want to expand the way people see negotiation, because certainly I've got some pushback about people are like, I don't think of my intimate partners, my relations with them as being a negotiation, or with my kids for that matter. But I think that's because of how we've been conditioned to see the world negotiation. We picture that boardroom, but all of life is a negotiation. You're negotiating every day, service providers, banks, insurance companies. When you're trying to influence or have a difficult discussion with your kids, it's certainly a negotiation. So I really got a dose of that during COVID, when you asked as well. My one son got diagnosed with a very serious mental health issue during COVID and ended up hospitalized. It was traumatic for everybody, and particularly traumatizing because during COVID, visitation was being restricted and the resources weren't available. So on two levels, one, I was negotiating, not even consciously all the time, but consistently negotiating to leverage to get that visitation. Well, what do you mean we can't have visitation? So I would leverage to be able to come in, bringing that RFIT model to the table to be able to get visitation. And at first it was just one person, and I used that to leverage to get two of us to visit. And then I used that to leverage going from 1 hour to 2 hours, and leverage that from 2 hours to unlimited visits. But the most profound eye-opener for me in terms of the application of my own systems was, at first I was just in a total reactive mode, right? I mean, I'm looking at my son, all of my fears and, recognizing that all of my dreams for what I hoped for him seemed to be shattering on the floor. So and he was angry about being there. So the first couple of visits, horrific, right? He was blaming and angry. And I, of course, was defensive because I was trying to show him that this all came from a place of love. And suddenly I'm like, I'm not practicing what I preach. So I brought one of my models, I call it the no fear model, where you look at what are the fears driving me and the other party? How is ego showing up for me and the other party? What am I too attached to? What are they going to be too attached to? Am I allowing myself to be reactive in them? So that FEAR. And when I did that, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about myself and how this impacts on me. I can't imagine what this experience is like for him. The fears must be multiplied. So the next time I came for a visit, I showed up, brought that RFIT model to the table, and really dug in and stuck to my guns. I sort of prepared for it. And we often don't prepare for our personal negotiations. And for this one, I came prepared for that difficult discussion and showed up from a place of absolute lack of ego,
Oh,
totally focus and curiosity on him. I am so sorry. I can't imagine what this has been like for you. And I've been making this about me. Tell me about your experience. So total curiosity. And at first he didn't trust it because I had been defensive. But January, when I was able to stick to sort of what I had planned to make this about him and bring those skills to the table, I saw literally a physical softening of him, and it opened up the space for him to heal, for me to heal, for him to move forward. It was a profound application of my own models in my personal life that made, I'd hate to think where we were had I not been able to tap into that and get a hold of myself, frankly.
wow. That's an incredible experience. And thank you for sharing. I know that must be difficult. And having raised 4 teenagers myself, I mean, let's face it, those years, every day is a negotiation.
Constant, constant juggling, and every day having to negotiate your mindset when you get out of bed, right? Who do I want to show up as today? Get very intentional about it. Absolutely.
And the other teenage negotiation that you could write a whole book, but the other negotiation I'm seeing happening now is older people, my generation, and they're being confronted with going to retirement homes, convalescence, therapy. And so that becomes a major negotiation with their children. And I feel for these poor children. They've got their families to raise, and then they're like the Oreo sandwich. They're in the middle between their children and their parents. But that is such an incredibly good tip. And I like the no fear, no ego model.
Yeah.
And as you talk to people, and if you ask them what they want, that's a big first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I love that you raised that because our society is changing. I mean, the demographics are changing in terms of age. And I think that what you talked about works both ways, right? Both for the person who is needing to be cared for in a different way as they get older, the negotiation with their children, but also for the children vis-a-vis the parents. And again, just sharing quickly, my mom was, in a long-term care facility this year, again, during COVID, lots of sort of traumatic adjustments, but really bringing that intentionality to those interactions with her. She's in the early and mid stages now of dementia. So often I don't know who I'm going to be meeting. Often she's 30 years ago and she forgets that my father has died, and it's like grieving all over again. So meeting her where she's at, I always start again from that place of curiosity to find out where is she at today and where can we take this? So you avoid a lot of that push-pull kind of conflict that I think a lot of parents and children in that situation face.
Okay, so that's a very helpful tip. So when you go to see your mom, what questions do you ask to determine where she's at?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I'll start by just having very casual, like, hey, mom, how are you going today? What have you been up to today? Tell me a little bit about your day, just open ended. If she says, oh my gosh, I was running up and down the halls looking for Cindy and Dale, which is myself and my younger sister, I know, okay, we're back a few decades here, right? So that she's looking, trying to ask questions to prompt as well about what have you been thinking about today? What's top on your mind? If she mentions again about, what, your dad hasn't called me today. I'm like, okay, so we're back here today. So just really learning the power of questions, asking those open-ended questions, with intention rather than closed questions, so that you are allowing her or him to be able to lead the conversation and get your grounding and your bearings from there. It can be really powerful.
Yeah, that's like playing that 20 question game. Pretty scary. Okay, what surprises people the most when they use your system? And what did they tell you about trying this out and their successes or their failures?
Yeah, no, great. I think probably most people come to me for the business, right? They're like, oh, I want to up level my skills to get a better position, to get more respect in the workplace, to get a better salary. And I think the thing that, I love this question because I think the thing that surprises them most is the impact on their personal relationships, the fact that they're able to really up level And I've had it both ways where, one of my clients came to me and she was in a, very long time marriage. And as we started working on getting her confidence up and stepping again, she came for the business piece of it. But then she recognized that this was not a relationship that was ever going to, meet her needs or have that mutual respect. And she was able to end up negotiating. She happened to leave that relationship. She moved across the country. She set up a new business. She got her first house on her own. And all of that happened within that first year when we were working together. But the opposite has also been true. People who came, who brought that kind of barracuda energy, and it was affecting their relationships. They came to me for the business piece, but she's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe the impact now. I show up as a better version of myself with my intimate partner. Our relationship has never been better. And with my kids, we were constantly like this because I knew what was right for them and I wanted to. And she said, now, oh my gosh, I'm able to show up in a different way. I have the best relationship with my kids. They're way more open with me than they ever were before. So definitely, I think that personal piece is the most surprising, but certainly they get benefits. Like I had one woman come to me who was suffering, sexual harassment extensively. Years she'd been suffering in the workplace before she came to me, and she was ready to quit. And as we worked together through some of these models and how to self-advocate and ask for what you want and sort of step into that feminine power, again, within that relatively short period, not only did she not quit, but she ended up then the year after becoming the vice president within her organization. It was a profound shift. So I believe it works if you're prepared to be vulnerable.
Okay, that's incredible. For my listeners, have you ever met someone who was unforgettable, someone who was priceless? You're going to hear about a few people like that right now. Have you ever met someone who was unforgettable? Someone who has touched your heart and soul? People who have faced difficult problems? People who have struggled to find solutions? People who fearlessly shared their stories? People who have not only informed you, but inspired you. People who have priceless personalities. I have been fortunate to host an internet radio talk show called January Jones Sharing Success Stories, and it has been my privilege to interview hundreds of guests. My guests have shared their stories, their struggles, their secrets, and their successes in their own words. In this book, we're talking about people dealing with problems such as incest, molestation, runaway kids, child abuse, drug abuse, polygamy, unemployment, scandal, and starting over. Then there are my guests dealing with difficult physical struggles such as blindness, cancer, and birth defects that are beyond traumatic. My guests have all been exciting, eclectic, and energizing. They have amazed, amused, and even astonished me. I have adored getting to meet them, and I adore sharing them with you.
Attention all listeners. Priceless Personalities, Success Stories Shared by January Jones, Volume 2 is now available at Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle editions. You'll be able to meet 10 amazing people who will be sharing their own personal stories with all their struggles, successes, and solutions, sprinkled with lots of humor and hope. Priceless Personalities features a teenager who becomes one of the famous Supremes from Motown, a nurse who as a humorist helps people to heal, an inspiring laughter yoga instructor, a mother dealing with the loss of a child, an incredible motivational speaker, a woman who married 5 times, a gifted paranormal nurse, a wise economist, a funny female humorist, along with an older man sharing his sweet childhood in the Deep South. January's guests are all amazing and amusing. You will never forget meeting them. Go to Amazon.com for your own priceless experience.
Welcome back with my priceless guest, Cindy Watson. It's so nice to have you with us today. Let's back up a little bit and talk about negotiating with bullies. And this is a thing that women and men deal with in the workplace and at home and at school. What are some tips when you're dealing with a really bad bully?
Yeah, great. And good gosh, in the legal profession, as you can imagine, January, I saw more than my share of that. Absolutely. So
Yes.
one aspect we already talked about was that no fear model, and that fear and ego in particular at the beginning of that. So when you're dealing with a bully, we immediately get in that reactive mode, that R of the no fear model. So when we're able to just allow ourselves to get grounded, decide in advance of that interaction, if possible, who you want to show up as. Choose 3 words actually that describe who you want to show up as, so that when you get triggered, if you get triggered, you could take that breath and ground yourself in those 3 words. I want it to show up as being compelling and calm, or whatever it is for you. There's no right or wrong answer. But also think about, most bullies are coming from a fear place. I mean, it's the absolute exception that you're dealing with a sociopath. So when you recognize this is somebody who's dealing with their own little girl or little boy hurt still, there is fear that is driving that, and there is ego that is showing up as a result of that. Think of something nice. We all have our vulnerabilities. So try and see that little hurt child in that other person. And then what I suggest you do is you invite them to be the best version of themselves. And one of the ways you do that is instead, if they're being really abrasive, instead of going, well, that's sexist, or that's racist, or that's really important, or you're a bully, which will immediately trigger their reactivity and double down, I'll normally just take a pause and say, you know what, Joe? I know that treating people with dignity and respect is something you really value. Or if he's constantly interrupting me, he or she, it's like, you know what? I know that you really feel strongly that everyone, it's important to you that everyone be heard, especially when they're not modeling that behavior. So let's take a step back and see what's happening here so we can get on track. In the vast majority of cases, that will diffuse the situation. It's like a little bit of a shock because you came from a place of respect and you are inviting them to be that best version of themselves. Instead of calling them out on the bad behavior, you're complimenting them, whether deserved or not. And the second tip, I call it elevated active listening. So we hear a lot about active listening, that, you rephrase back to somebody what they've said to make sure there's no misunderstanding. I invite you to take that a step further. So especially when you disagree or somebody's bullying, play back their position to them in terms that are even more generous than they made the argument themselves. It triggers this reciprocity in our brain. So if somebody's bullying and bulldozing their position, usually it's a fear and that desire to control and to be heard. So when you're able to then articulate back what their position is, whether you agree or disagree, just say, let me make sure I've got this right. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're worried about this. Your fear is this, and articulate it so elegantly. Again, in the vast majority of cases, January, it will trigger that reciprocity where they start showing up as a better version. And having said that, don't ever stay in a situation where you're being abused. No, that the A of no fear, don't ever be so attached to saying in a particular negotiation that you don't walk away when it's appropriate either.
Well, Cindy, that is brilliant. As I'm running it through my mind. So what you're actually doing is you're approaching them in a positive, empathetic way, and you're repeating to them their argument.
Yeah.
And you're kind of reinforcing so that would diffuse them completely. I like that.
Yeah, thanks. And then it opens the space for you to be able to have your turn to start framing your argument, but from a place where they're going to be a little more receptive in the vast majority of cases.
So the big tip here is to try to be gentle, reasonable, and to take things down a notch and lower the temperature and get things where it's manageable. And this is good advice, especially for young people, because I'm hearing so much on the show about their children being bullied.
Yeah.
And it is such a difficult thing to teach a small child how to negotiate that. And I'm glad that people are becoming more aware. And I've had several guests who have written brilliant books on childhood bullying.
Nice.
People, that's a really incredible, helpful suggestion. Now, before we close, and this has been such an enjoyable podcast, this is a question I ask everyone on the show. If you could choose who to have dinner with, besides me, living or dead, who would your dinner guest be?
Just one?
Well, let's, no, I'll give you two.
Am I having a party?
Let's go for two. What's your
Okay. Well, one may be a cheat, but for me, one would definitely be my dad, who is no longer with us. He died at only 52 years old, unexpectedly of a heart attack, and was a profound impact on my life. And now the world has changed so much, and ironically, in ways he anticipated way ahead of his time. So I would love to be able to have him to dinner and get his perspectives. And I would say Martin Luther King, again, who is somebody who in his time was a master negotiator, not coming from a competitive power over, control over, but somebody who truly exemplified seeking to get power with in the face of horrific injustice. You talk about dealing with bullies and being able to show up still from a place of grace. I would love to pick his brain.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I would enjoy having dinner with him too. And talking about your dad, at 52 years, your mother had to deal with being a widow for quite a few years, didn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a shock. And she was so young. My mom had me at 16 years old. So she was a child herself in many ways. So I think she was quite lost when he left us early.
Oh, yeah, I can relate to that. I was myself a widow when I was 25. My first husband was killed during Vietnam.
Oh.
And when I meet older women who are becoming widows, it's so difficult for them, and especially for that many years. It's so wonderful that she had you and your siblings to help her through that.
And hats off to you. That's so young to be widowed. My goodness, I can't imagine.
This has been delightful, and
Yes,
I hope that you will come back. And for our listeners, be sure to copy down the information and go to Cindy's website and email. And if you have any questions, I'm sure she'd love to answer. We've tried to be informative and inspiring today. My upcoming guests will all be eclectic, energizing, and exciting, just like Cindy was today. My show is on next Tuesday live at 2 p.m. We're having Debbie Peterson, the author of The Happiest Corruption. And she will be here talking about Women's History Month again with us. Now, my 80-year-old thought for the day. If you think that a cold seat in a public restaurant is unpleasant, believe me, when you sit down on a warm seat in a public restroom, it's so much, much worse. So there you go with my advice.
I love it.
Signing off from the Glitter Granny today. Thank you for entering our No Wine Zone. And please share our stories and our show with everyone you know. And remember, you need to stop whining, and then you need to start smiling. And if that doesn't work, then you can just go out and start eating chocolate. Lots and lots of chocolate. Maybe have a glass of red wine too. Thanks again to Cindy Watson. Take care and stay safe, everyone, until we meet again.
We want to thank you for listening to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Always remember Ms. Jones' personal mantra, if you can think it, you can do it. That's what all of our guests have done with their lives, and so can you. You are the ultimate success coach in your own life. All you need to do will be to start sharing your own story with your family and friends. We hope that our guest stories will encourage you to explore an equation in your future that will combine your creativity plus connecting with others will enable you to be successful too. Always remember, your passion plus your purpose will equal prosperity as you explore the wonderful world of January Jones.